Hey everyone, I just wanted to talk a little bit today about our humble friend, the comma, because the comma lately is being used in a way that breaks my brain a little bit. By which I mean it's that I feel like there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about a particular use of the comma or a particular situation that you shouldn't use a comma in, that is becoming extremely common for people to use a comma in. And I don't know, I don't want to speculate too much about how or why this issue has exploded, but I will say that it's been really, I would say, in the past, really as recently as like 2 years or so, that I've really started to notice it becoming increasingly ubiquitous. And and even within that period of time, the frequency with which I see it has just kind of exploded. And so it's not that I feel like I can do a whole lot to stem the tide of this issue, but I do care a lot about these kind of little matters of style and things like that. So I do want to do what I can to kind of try to stem the tide a little bit. I think maybe what's happening is that a lot of folks just never were taught about this particular issue, or maybe were taught something wrong, and have never and just never internalized that there actually are situations in which you will do this with commas, and situations in which you won't do this with commas, or you shouldn't. Okay, so so let me get to the heart of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so the other day I saw a post on Blue Sky promoting a video game. Now, I've changed the details here because this is not about any one account or any one person, any one writer out there. Okay, this is about an issue that I'm seeing again, ubiquitously. I see it in I see it in online writing all the time, not just in social media, which is maybe very casual, but also, the other day I saw it in an NPR text story on the NPR website. So yeah, I'm just starting to see it everywhere. So, but let's take this as an example. Okay, so here's the sample imitation post that I've created that's structurally the same as the actual post, but I've changed the details because again, this isn't about any one post, any one story. It's about a widespread issue that I'm seeing in online writing in recent years. Okay, so it reads: legendary composer Yuzo Koshiro created the main title theme for our game. Now, when I read this, see, I have so internalized that when names should be set off with commas and when they shouldn't, and this being an instance where they shouldn't, that when I read this, my brain just kind of automatically goes like, does not compute, inaccurate, error, syntax error. Okay, but why is this an error? What's wrong with it? Because aren't there situations in which a name should be set off with commas, the way Yuzo Koshiro's name is set off with commas here? Yes, of course there are. Let's take, for instance, if, for instance, you had a sentence that was structured like this: one of gaming's most legendary composers, Yuzo Koshiro, created the main title theme for our game. This is a case where you would want the name set off with commas. Okay, but how can you tell the difference? Well, I'll tell you. In our original example, the actual, statement that I saw online where a name was set off with commas, the statement does not work if you remove the name. The name is essential. It's absolutely essential information. It is essential to the flow of information and to our understanding of it. It is not something set apart in any way. You cannot remove it without the sentence kind of collapsing, because without it, what you end up with is legendary composer created the main title theme for our game. And that is obviously a sentence that does not work. In our other example, the one in which the name was appropriately and correctly set off with commas, we can remove that information from the sentence, that little piece from the sentence, without the sentence collapsing like a Jenga tower when you pull an essential piece out from the foundation, right? So it then reads, one of gaming's most legendary composers created the main title theme for our game. Now, you could argue that naming the composer here is very useful, that it is very, very helpful, supportive information, but it is not structurally absolutely essential. This is a perfectly functional and understandable sentence on its own. So maybe that's one way to help yourself kind of remember when a name should be set off with commas and when it shouldn't, is to ask yourself, is this a piece that can be removed with the sentence still holding together structurally, and still making sense, being legible, and having just basic correct syntax, or is it absolutely essential, right? And if it's absolutely essential, maybe imagine that you want it to fuse entirely with the rest of the sentence without commas setting it off, whereas if it is just a bit of support that's not entirely necessary, then you can and you should set it off, to kind of indicate that it's this little added piece to help help the meaning of the sentence be more full, more clear, but without being absolutely essential to the structure of the sentence. Now, you may also say to yourself, okay, but what's the big deal? Like, what if this is just an evolution of how language works? And whereas we used to kind of have this rule about when names should be set off with commas and when they shouldn't, we've just kind of done away with that now, and it's okay to set off names with commas, at any and every opportunity. To that, I guess I would just say that I'm all for, and I delight in, the constant evolution of language. I love when new terms come along that maybe serve a need or do something that there wasn't really a good a good term for before. I'm always open to evolutions of syntax and language, and I mean, that language is a living, evolving thing. That's just that's part of what makes language exciting and interesting. However, in this particular case, I see it as a loss of something rather than a gain of something. I see it as a kind of sanding away of just a bit of texture, a bit of clarity, a bit of language structure that makes my reading of something a little bit clearer, a little bit more pleasurable. I have learned to kind of hear in my head these rhythms that the commas kind of dictate, and glean information from them, and have them kind of fit neatly into the larger structure of a sentence. And so when I read a name being set off by commas where it's just so integral to the information and the flow of a sentence, I just feel like I'm being kind of paused for no reason, right? I'm just like, I'm like, it's like hitting a little bit of like a speed bump or a roadblock, when no, like that information should just, like, it should just flow. It should just be like legendary composer Yuzo Koshiro, right? It's not like legendary composer Yuzo Koshiro. No, I want that to flow. And yeah, I mean, that's my argument for kind of reaffirming this as something, something that we should make an effort to kind of reestablish and hold on to, about how, uh, how sentences work, and how and when we set names off with commas, and when we don't. To elaborate on this a bit, let me draw on this book, Dreyer's English, by Benjamin Dreyer. Benjamin Dreyer was the chief copy editor at Random House for quite some time. And this is really a delightful book for not just anyone who edits for a living, but really I would recommend it to writers and to anyone with an interest in style and in clarity and in how language makes meaning, because it's not dry at all. It's filled with great anecdotes and charm and wit. It's really, an enjoyable read, in addition to being a kind of handy little manual of good style information. So there's one section in this book that is called the only comma. Now, I've edited this with apologies to Benjamin Dreyer, but just for length, for purposes of this video, I've edited this bit down a bit. But let's take a look at this little section called the only comma. Okay, so here Dreyer writes the only comma. Okay, if a writer writes a sentence like, "He traveled to Pompeii with his daughter Clara," a copy editor will, if the fact is not already known to the copy editor, query in the margin author, only daughter, if so, comma. Thus to suggest, right, he traveled to Pompeii with his daughter Clara, it suggests Clara as opposed to Lisa or Sarah or any of his other daughters. He traveled to Pompeii with his daughter Clara, whereas if he has just the one daughter, it would be he traveled to Pompeii with his daughter Clara. Only commas are used to set off nouns that are indeed the only one of their kind in the vicinity, as in, say, Abraham Lincoln's eldest son, Robert, was born on August 1st, 1843. The notion being that as one can have only one eldest son, his name in this sentence is an interesting, noteworthy, yet inessential piece of information. So this goes back to that idea that here you can remove, from the Jenga tower of this sentence, you could slide out Robert, and the sentence would still hold together. Abraham Lincoln's eldest son was born on August 1st, 1843. It's just a little additional, bit of support there, and therefore you do want to set it off with a comma. Dreyer then goes on to say, at the other end of the spectrum, be careful not to set an only comma where there is no onlyness, as in, say, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Edith Wharton was born in New York City. Because Mrs. Wharton is merely one of many winners of the Pulitzer, there should be no only comma, right? Here, this is a case where that information is absolutely essential to the sentence, to the sentence's meaning, and therefore, if you're going to say Edith Wharton's name in there, you want it to just be part of the flow of the sentence, so that the sentence, is integrated. That's not Edith Wharton isn't a little supportive, add-on there. It's essential to what you're talking about, and so there shouldn't be any commas there, setting it off from the rest of the sentence. Now, I do want to be clear that there aren't hard and fast rules governing all comma usage, right? The use of commas is often up to a writer's discretion, and they can be used or not used to considerable effect, right? There's a great moment in the film Blue Moon in which Lorenz Hart, played by Ethan Hawke, meets E.B. White. E.B. White, the writer of Charlotte's Web, among other things. He was considered a kind of master stylist. And Hart says to him something like, I'm in love with your language. I'm in love with your punctuation. You can't move a single comma, am I right? By which he means to praise White's mastery of using commas to create a very particular rhythm. He even says Hart, who was a famous lyricist, says you're a musician. He says to White in that scene because of his use of punctuation, and yes, like authors can and do use or not use commas to great effect. Just to give you a few quick examples here, there's a great story collection here I have here called A Manual for Cleaning Women by Lucia Berlin. And in the foreword here, give me a moment. The introduction by Stephen Emerson. Emerson notes that in Lucia's prose, punctuation is often unorthodox and sometimes inconsistent. Speed is one of the reasons. She abhors the comma that results in a pause that would not be heard in speech, or that produces an undesired slowing of any kind. In other cases, the eschewal of a comma will result in a certain hectic quality that promotes momentum. So, and he says that, in editing this collection, because this is posthumous, so Berlin could not herself kind of contribute to it or oversee it, sadly. He says, for the most part, we have avoided sanitizing her punctuation. So, he's trying to be respectful and recognize that it is a creative choice on her part to often eschew a comma where another writer might have used a comma. Meanwhile, a book I just finished yesterday, Agency by William Gibson. So Gibson, at least in this book, I would say, loves his commas. He uses commas with abandon. There are commas everywhere, and I'd say that their presence has an effect, just as their absence has an effect in Berlin's work, and that effect, I would say. So Gibson is very, very much about images, right? This is a novel that moves at a mile a minute, right? At one point, its protagonist, Verity Jane, is strapped to the back of a motorcycle that's being driven all over the Bay Area. She's just kind of caught up in some larger force of events. She doesn't know where she's going, and as a reader, you too kind of feel like you're just strapped to the back of this thing that's just speeding along. You don't know where it's going. It's disorienting, but it's exciting also. But in the midst of that, he will still like the use of a comma to say, like there's a for instance, there's one particular sentence that stuck in my mind was something like, she saw a tree, comma, beyond the fence, and where you don't need a comma there, right? She saw a tree beyond the fence, but the fact that he puts a comma there, I think it just made for me as a reader, it made my mind register that detail a little bit more, and it's almost like in the midst of this, we're moving. He wants you to feel like the moment is always slipping away, but there's a clarity, but it's also just it's always just gone, even almost as it's happening. And the fact that there'll be these little pauses in there just makes me, as a reader, kind of, like I'm trying to kind of take them in. I'm trying to like internalize them, and as they're speeding by at this. So it's like a blur, and it's in high def at once, and it's very effective, I think, for what Gibson wants to do. Um, okay, so just to wrap it up here, let me close with one more example um, uh, uh, of a incorrect uh, name being set off, and then we'll be done. Okay, if you saw the sentence online, uh, former Genesis frontman Peter Gabriel is one of rock music's most adventurous artists, you could give it kudos for being extremely correct in what it's saying about Peter Gabriel. Yes, absolutely. He is a genius of, rock and roll. I mean, his 1980 record, his 1982 record, so, those three records in a row make it just a staggeringly brilliant, legendary run. However, you could also criticize this for its incorrect punctuation, that being the fact that Peter Gabriel's name is set off with commas, because that name is essential to this sentence working, right? If we remove that, and this sentence reads, former Genesis frontman is one of rock music's most adventurous artists. Well, first of all, in terms of syntax, that just doesn't make any sense, right? We absolutely need Peter Gabriel in that sentence for it to just, and that information should just flow. It's an integrated, it's all of a piece. It is all just, one flowing correct piece of information. Then when if the commas here were removed. However, if the sentence were structured this way, the original lead singer of Genesis, Peter Gabriel, is one of rock music's most adventurous artists. Here, you would want his name set off by commas because there is only one original lead singer of Genesis, and in terms of the syntax of this sentence, if we were to slide that piece out, of the Jenga tower that is this sentence, right? It would then read, the original lead singer of Genesis is one of rock music's most adventurous artists. And that is, it's a perfectly fine, correct, grammatically correct sentence. So, I hope this has been interesting, fun, illuminating, something for you. I hope if nothing else, you now know how neurotic I am about this issue, and I hope that you will join me in helping us together rise up and overcome our current comma crisis in the name of clarity, in the name of style. Let's reclaim this practice and try to start getting it right again. Everyone, everywhere. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Caro's Styles Corner, if you will, and maybe I'll see you again soon. Take care. Thanks for watching.